When working with clay, there are a number of different forming methods. For the drape mold bowl, we're going to do just that. Drape our hand-pounded slab over the top of a newspaper-wrapped plastic bowl. The first step is clay preparation. Taking a lump of clay in one hand, we're going to use the other to begin slowly stretching the diameter before we lay it and hand-pound it into shape. Using the heel of your hand or your palm, you want to attempt to compress every visible portion of the surface with the same amount of pressure. When one side is completed, flip the slab over and do the same process on the underside. As you continue working that surface, be sure you're focusing on the amount of pressure that you're using and using equally over everything. Once it's thinner and wider, we're going to lay it flat on the canvas and we're ready for the next step. Working with the outside edge of your hand, we're going to hit the surface evenly 10 to 12 times, working left to right. Then we'll rotate the slab so the next 10 to 12 hits are going in the opposite direction. Here we go. So the outside edge of your palm, 10 to 12 hits, left to right. When doing this, try to maintain even downward pressure so that we don't get one area or one space too thin. Now, going in the opposite direction, we want to repeat that process again. If you look at the exposed surface, we have a number of higher and lower spots. This is natural when you're working the surface without the aid of any tools. We can worry about smoothing out those lumps once we've reached the desired thickness and the working diameter of the clay. Now we want to repeat that process on the flip side of your lump. Turn it over, lay it flat, hit 10 to 12 more times left to right, rotate it 10 to 12 more times, and then we'll look at determining the thickness of our slab. Now that we've worked the surface down a little bit thinner, we want to check to be sure we're not going too thin. The best method for checking the thickness of a slab is to use our needle tool. For this project, we're trying to give ourselves a slab that is as close to the thickness of a pinky finger or just a little under a half an inch. Here is how you check it. Taking the needle tool in one hand, holding it just like a pencil, we're going to start in the middle of the slab, pushing the pin through until you feel it hit the canvas. Now slowly slide your index finger down until the tip of your finger touches the surface. Pinch with your thumb on the opposite side and carefully pull the pin out the same direction it went in. Now if you look at the exposed portion, or the part of the pin that sticks out past my fingertips, it's still just a little bit thicker than my pinky finger. Be sure you check the surface at least 4 more times before continuing the pounding, rotating, flipping, and checking process. Now that I've checked the overall surface of my slab in at least 5 different places, I need to try to remember where it's thicker and where it's thinner so that I can continue pounding and rotating the surface until I've reached the desired diameter and, most importantly, an even thickness. Be sure you work this process evenly on both sides of the slab. Even compression will help with the removal of air bubbles. When you think your slab is the size that we need, lay your paper template in order to check the workable surface area for the bowl. If your slab is the correct size and you have a little exposed clay sticking out past the edges of the template, then you're ready to work on smoothing before we drape and trim. If the slab is still a little too narrow, check to see where you have thicker spots and continue working the surface little by little so it's large enough to fit that template. Before we can drape, we first need to smooth the exposed surface. To do this, we're going to use the soft blue plastic rib and a little bit of water. Anytime you use a tool on the surface of fresh plastic clay, you want to be sure that you apply water to the surface before using the tool. This helps to minimize the amount of clay that is pulled off from the surface. Taking a damp sponge, use it like a paintbrush and lightly apply just a little moisture to the surface before using the plastic rib. Back and forth, back and forth. Now, holding the rib with your thumb on top of the raised letters and the curved side facing up, flip your wrist over and begin dragging the edge along the surface. When you're working the surface, be sure you're not applying so much pressure that you're denting or digging in, but you want to use enough pressure that it compresses the raised areas. Remember to do this step going in multiple overlapping directions. Top to bottom, left to right, back and forth. The more you do this, the smoother that surface will become. When you're done, be sure you wipe that tool clean, set it aside, and the next step before moving on, we're going to use our needle tool. And you'll notice that as you drag that blue plastic rib over the surface, sometimes we get little air pockets or air bubbles that stick up. So, using the tip of that pin, you want to pop these very, very carefully, just pressing enough so that you break the surface. Then, using a fingertip, you want to go back over and rub those areas clean. Before lifting and draping, we want to finalize the surface one last time. Use the blue plastic rib and the needle tool just as we did in the previous steps. For this next step, we're going to set our newspaper wrapped bowl over the top of the banding wheel. Anytime you use a banding wheel, you want to be sure to cover the metallic surface with either paper towels or newspaper so your clay doesn't get stuck. Now very, very carefully, we're going to lift the slab from the surface of the table with both hands, eyeball the center of the bowl with the center of the slab, and gently lay the clay in place over the top of the bowl. Using both hands and rotating them slowly over the surface, we're going to begin pressing our slab against the exterior of the bowl. Doing this slowly and consistently will give us the bowl shape required for this unit. If you have any areas that overlap or fold over, ignore them for now and continue compressing. Using the fettling knife, we're going to remove the excess skirt of clay from the wheel head. When you hold the knife, keep the blade as vertical as you can. This helps to keep us from beveling the outer edge. Press the tip of the knife in until you feel it hit the banding wheel head, then slowly rotate the wheel until you make it all the way around. Now, using the serrated metal rib, we're going to even out the exterior of our bowl by scoring and smoothing in multiple directions. Be sure you work top to bottom, then left to right. As you do this, try working in small sections. Pick one area to really focus on. And again, start top to bottom, then move left to right. After you've scored one section of the bowl, now we're going to use the non-serrated blade edge and drag it over the surface of the score marks. This, you'll see, will leave that surface bowling ball smooth. But just like using the serrated side, you want to work one direction first, then go in the opposite. The last step before applying texture is to level off the rim. To do that, we're going to use this wooden spear, come up roughly a finger's thickness from the bottom edge, drag the tip of that tool as carefully as you can all the way around until you stop where you started. This groove will be what we use to place the tip of the X-Acto blade in as we cut. Once you've carefully removed the leftover clay, use a fingertip, a little bit of pressure, maybe some water, run it around once, and get it nice and smooth.